Hey guys, welcome to the channel. So recently I found a TikTok that to me looked like a perfect base design to turn into a game, and if we look at the video now, I'm sure you'll see what I mean. So if it were a game, the player would be controlling the woman, and as you're eating the sweets, the UI would display your score. In today's video, I'm going to give you an overview of how you could make that into a game. I think the best place to start would be to try and replicate the scene with 3D models, and then afterwards code in the game functionality. Since making the models is a little time consuming, I'm going to see if the assets I need are available online. So if we go to Turbo Squid and search for treadmills, we can see that there are a lot of models here available, but some of them are kind of expensive. So I'm just going to set the min-max price to 0. Okay, this first one looks fine to me. So I'm going to import the model into Blender and remove the excess components that might get in the way of the camera. What's good about this particular model is that the mesh is broken up into different objects. This is useful for deletion, as well as later on for when I want to make the conveyor belt move. Next, I'm going to import the treadmill into a new Unity project. I've configured this Unity project to use the universal render pipeline, as it makes it easy to create shaders. Speaking of that, I've created a simple animated shader ref that I've named conveyor. So the way it works is it takes in a texture and then uses the time node to continually alter the UV coordinates. If you're doing this, make sure to change the wrap mode on the texture to repeat. The result is this moving conveyor belt effect. Alright, now I'm heading back into Blender in order to create the background for our scene. So if we look at the video, we can see there's a background consisting of a couple of doorways and this love shelf decor thing. Here's a couple of door-shaped blocks to cut holes into a plane. That'll be our wall. Next, we're heading back into Turbo Squid to pick up a door model. This one looks good. It also fits very well into the wall. Okay, so now we're going to have a go at creating the love decor. I've added a cube to the scene. I'm just using the extrusion tool in order to shape the mesh so it looks how we want it to look. I've also used the same process to create the skirting around the wall and the door frames. Okay, now I've exported my background out and imported it into Unity, and here I'm just adjusting its position in the scene. Notice I've also added in a couple of extra planes to make up the different sections of the floor. Alright, now I want to add in texture into my scene because it's looking quite blank. So AMD recently released a free material library called Material X, link in description. It has a lot of high quality photorealistic textures, and each one comes with a normal map and a roughness map. So let's first grab a light coloured wood texture for the floor. This one looks good. Next I'll add in a marble tile floor for the back right room. I'll also add in this dark coloured wood for the love decor. And finally this brushed aluminium texture for the door handles. Okay, let's just add that into the scene. Alright, that's all of our static elements of our scene set up. Now for something a little bit trickier. I need a person to be able to put into the scene. I found Carla and Turbo. The model is great for this project because it's rigged, which will allow me to pose and animate it. Okay, now I'm going to bring Carla into Blender and I'll pose her in a laying down position. That sounds kind of bad. So in the video it looks like the woman has her legs crossed, her back arched up, the right arm braced onto the floor, and her left arm is holding onto the can on the treadmill. So if you put Blender into pose mode, you can select the individual joints and transform them how you like. I'm going to use this cylinder here to act as a can so I can position her hand correctly. I also brought in the treadmill model into Blender just to make sure the positioning looks correct. Okay, that's the pose done. Now I want to create an animation for the mouth. This is pretty simple to do by inserting keyframes into our timeline and then rotating the jaw joint. So I created an animation where the whole face was involved, where she was blinking and her eyebrows went up. But for whatever reason, when I imported that model into Unity, it would only animate the mouth movement, which is odd because in Blender it looks like all of the movement is stored within the one clip. But since the mouth movement is the most important part, I'm happy to just move on to the next part. Okay, now onto the really cool part. We need the model to be able to move from side to side in a realistic manner, but we can't really use a conventional animation because the player needs to control the movement. This is where Unity animation rigging comes into play. Animation rigging lets you create procedural motion during runtime. Importantly for this project, you can use inverse kinematics to drive the motion of Carla's limbs, meaning the joints bend and move, as you can see here. So for this model, I'm using a multi-aim constraint on the hips and the head. This will rotate Carla's body towards a target. And I've also written a script that gives the player control to move the target left and right. So when the target moves, that will also then cause Carla's body to shift in either direction along the end of the treadmill. I've also added in 2-bone inverse kinematic constraints on the arms and legs of Carla, with different targets set to the positions of the hands and the feet. This will lock the hands and feet in place and move the limbs around when the body shifts. Okay, let's look a little bit more at the player controller script. So there's a few things going on here, but the player movement is the important part. So when the player holds the right mouse button down, the script looks to see what direction the cursor is moving in and then moves that target in that direction. When the mouse button is up, it stops moving. This looks a little bit more complex here because I've added in an additional point for the target to move between. Okay, now let's just create our suite. I'm using a sphere as a suite here. I've attached a rigid body to it and its rotation is frozen in the X, Y, and Z axis. I'm saving this object in a prefab and this will be referenced by the drop suite script. So for the drop suite script, I have made an enumerator function that instantiates a copy of the suite, gives it a random color from this range, waits for a random amount of time, and then repeats that process for as long as the game is open. It will also destroy the suite after a certain amount of time has elapsed. This script is attached to a game object that's movement is being animated back and forth along the width of the treadmill. Okay, let's look at the conveyor script now. So the animated conveyor texture won't actually move the objects on the conveyor since no actual transformations or forces are being applied to it. So instead we have to script it. So in this script, as sweets drop onto the conveyor belt, it'll add them into a list and then in the fixed update loop, it'll loop through all of the sweets and set their velocity. The speed of the sweets should match the conveyor for this effect to look convincing. Right, let's move on to the eating of the sweets. So I've attached this cylinder to Carla's mouth, turned off its mesh renderer, and in the mesh collider enabled convex and trigger. Then I attached a script to the cylinder called collect munchies. So this script works in a very similar way to the conveyor script. When a sweet enters the trigger area, it's added to a list. All the sweets in the list are pulled towards Carla's mouth. That fires the sweets out of the trigger area, which destroys the sweet and iterates a score. You'll also need to create a score manager and text to display the score. So we only want this effect activated when Carla's mouth is open. So in the player controller script, whenever the spacebar is hit, the mouth animation is played, the cone is activated, and then deactivated once the animation has ended. Okay, that's all of the functionality completed. I've also added in some post-processing and some cinematic effects to make it look a bit cooler. To do that, I used the Feel Asset Pack, which is a paid asset found on the Unity Asset Store. If you'd like to play this game, you can find it on itch.io. This version isn't all that mobile friendly, so I advise trying it on your desktop PC or laptop. Thank you all for watching. I may do another devlog about updates to this project, but I haven't quite decided yet whether or not I want to work on this further. You think I should do, let me know. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the comments section for the next couple of days. Goodbye, and I'll see you next time. Huh? What's that?